our online audience joining us now, as well as we have our beautiful in-person audience here at the Siena Art Institute. So it's great to have you all with us here in person. And as people are starting to see the notification, they can be joining us online for this evening's conversation with Farsad Labbauf, who is here as our resident artist at the Siena Art Institute. And it's wonderful to have this opportunity to get to know more about his background, about his career as a very, I would say, multicultural artist. And I think it's really inspiring also for our students and for our community members to have the chance to get to know you and get to know more about your work as well. So for our in-person crowd, we'll also have the chance to go upstairs after the slideshow presentation to actually see in person Farsad's studio and to get to know more about the materials of your creative process. So we're really looking forward to that. Just as a brief introduction, since today's activity is part of a larger initiative, I just wanted to share a little bit about also some of the activities that we've had going on all day today here at the Siena Art Institute with our group of local teenagers who are participating in workshops with our faculty members connected to the Creativity Project, which is part of the Erasmus Plus strategic partnerships. So this is a project that's helping to provide resources for young people in the fields of creativity, creative thinking, critical thinking, collaboration, communication, skills that are important for artists, but not only. So thinking about how these skills can help young people as they're at the start of their career paths. So obviously a chance this evening to talk with a creative professional like Farsad is certainly very inspiring. So we're really looking forward to hearing from him. If you're interested to know more about the Creativity Initiative, we also do have some resources that we're making available online as an open source platform. So we definitely would encourage you to also contact us if you'd like to have more information about that. We will be continuing to upload more materials online as time goes on, but for now we can just share a little glimpse. The next slide just has some examples of some of the different workshops connected to our activities here at the Siena Art Institute. So for example, this afternoon we had young people going around working on our photography workshops. You may have seen them for those of you here in person. So this is again connected to this larger initiative, obviously with resources in English, but also translated into other languages with our different European partners. And of course, the next image, just some information about the activities for our Italian participants who are with us here today. So just to explain how our activity this evening is connected to these larger initiatives. But let me just share with you a little bit of information about tonight's speaker. So Farsad, as I mentioned, is one of our artists in residence here at the Siena Art Institute. He is an Iranian visual artist, and he's currently working in the New York area where he's been based for many years. He's best known for his linear figurative paintings, and he immigrated to the United States at the age of 13. He enrolled at the Rhode Island School of Design, where he received his Bachelor of Fine Arts, and also that was followed by a second degree in industrial design. His work is inspired in part by theories in quantum physics, as well as monistic belief systems. Subject of his recent paintings include icons of global pop culture, war, and depictions of the self. His paintings have been featured in more than 60 group shows across the globe, including Saatchi Gallery in London, Ex Auro Museum in Pescara, Italy, in addition to solo exhibitions in New York, Boston, Amsterdam, Tehran, and the Isfahan Museum of Contemporary Art. His work is currently represented by Etemad Gallery in Iran, as well as Roya Kahajavi projects in New York. We really welcome comments and questions from our audience, both in person as well as for our viewers joining us online. Feel free to write any questions in the comment section, and we'll save time at the second part of today's presentation for a Q&A. So without further ado, we can turn the microphone over to Farsad.
Lisa. Thank you everyone for our live audience here, as well as everybody online who's watching. Before I start talking, well, thank you also for giving a history of my background. I was going to share part of that. I might still. But I want to thank the Siena Art Institute for this amazing experience. It really has been remarkable in many different ways. Just the warm community here, getting to know the brilliant author, my fellow resident, Sarah Hanstra from Canada. Just so much, just navigating the medieval architecture of the city, not to mention the treasures at the Pinacoteca. I could easily spend a year here painting and researching. So if anyone knows of any scholarships, fellowships, grants, by all means, please let me know. I would love to return and spend more time here. So thank you. I'm very grateful. I'm going to touch up a little bit on what you just shared already. So I was born in Tehran, Iran, and lived there for the first 13 years of my life, until 1979, when my parents brought my sister and I, my only other sibling, to the US because of the Iranian Revolution. Our education was interrupted, and so after finishing high school, I attended Rhode Island School of Design, RISD, studied fine arts, painting, as well as industrial design. And after RISD, I moved around a bunch. I moved to Boston for a while, San Francisco, New York City, and I'm actually very proud to call New Jersey my home for the last 21 years. Now, this is a view of Jersey City, New Jersey. New Jersey doesn't often, unfortunately, get its due credit in the media. It gets a bad rep, but it is an amazing state. And I have seen Jersey City in particular develop so much in the last 21 years that I've lived there. This is a view of downtown, so it looks very corporate. I actually don't live there. I live behind there, near a town named Hoboken in Jersey City Heights. It is one of the most culturally diverse populations and ethnically diverse populations in the United States, I believe, after Houston. So, and we also have, of course, Mana Contemporary, a beautiful old factory that was renovated into the state-of-the-art facility with artist studios, storage space for artworks, temperature controlled, a small museum, and a frame shop. And I'm very happy to say next year, the first Northern European satellite branch of George Pompidou Center will open in Jersey City. So that's my shout out to New Jersey. Yay. I'm very proud. So having said all of that, my infomercial about New Jersey, this is a recent sculpture actually by the Spanish sculptor Jaume Plensa in one of the parks across from Manhattan. And she's saying shh to New York, but it's actually called Water Soul. And this is where I have lived and worked for the last 21 years. It's a renovated industrial building. It's a loft building. I live on the 4th floor and work on the 5th. So it's a very easy commute. Just to give you a little bit of an idea of my space. So because of restrictions with time, I'm only going to talk about my work starting around the year 2000. Prior to that, most of my work was very much based about figurative expressionism, kind of pouring myself out in a raw manner onto the canvas or collage or sculpture. I really believed in that style and made about 300 to 400 pieces, mostly paintings and some mixed media collages and sculpture. But towards the end of the 90s, several things started to shift in my personal life, as well as my work, which have always been intertwined. I started to become aware that our emotions are very liquid. They're malleable. They transform by the way we think about different subject matters. So emotions became secondary, and the idea of contemplation became more important. Contemplating actually various subjects that interested me at the time, like monistic belief systems, quantum physics, and so forth, which I'm not going to get into now, like string theory. But all of those inspired me towards the next step in my work. The other thing that happened around that time, my parents brought us to the United States in 1979 with the hopes that we would return and continue to live in Iran. But it wasn't for another 17 years before I returned to Tehran, my native homeland. And when I returned, my parents had kept both our bedrooms, my sister and mine, exactly the same. Everything, all the objects in the drawers, in the closet, even the calendar on the wall was on the same date. So Of course, I was really touched. I was very honored, but at the same time, I was very disturbed with this gap of time and the cultural clash that happened, which is, I think, inherent and born within every immigrant. And in order to make peace with that, I kind of pulled out some of the materials that were in my desk and the closet, school books from childhood, drawings, and sat them for a little while. And then in a ritualistic manner, there was no formal concern for precision or aesthetics per se, but just kind of like how my body was torn away from the land, I started to cut up the pieces and kind of reconfigure them and contemplate their relationship and their subjects together. So here are a series of 7 sewings. I like to call them sewing collages from the early 2000s. And they're all sewn with thread onto black paper and all made during that one trip. Now I'm going to go, because I have a number of slides and it's a short time, so I'm going to go through them fast. But if anyone is interested, by all means, I can go back, or please refer to my website at labbauf.com. Many of the images are also on there. Okay, so at the time I was living in New York, and when I returned to New York, I continued making collages with found images. My studio was located in the garment district of New York on West 38th Street, so I had a lot of access, if you will, to sewing supplies, needles, safety pins, scissors, and it was a great time of exploration, just making it. And each image I show you is one of many for the series. It's just an example of what was going on at the time. Again, it was a great time of exploration, not in terms of only making these two-dimensional collages, but in other parts of my life. I was examining my relationship with the passage of time and how the issues of connectivity, how one moment connects to the other. At the time, one night, I just was reflecting on how I keep putting my trash out every night. And it became kind of like a personal diary, if you will. And in order to kind of comprehend that better, I started to sew. This is called 38 feet of trash together, to examine my relationship with the passage of time as a spiral. These are some details. Another project I worked on was the zip tie project, using zip ties and steel T-pins to basically explore random connectivity and organic patterns developing. This is in Jersey City Museum. It was an installation from, 2006. Unfortunately, I don't have too many good shots, but it just gives you an idea of what I was exploring at the time. Okay, so how all of this does connect to creating an image. I wanted a process that was malleable, it was transient, it was liquid. Gluing something down, both symbolically and literally, was too rigid, it was too confined. I wanted a process that I could connect something, like even chunks of paint that I would sew onto the canvas. And if I didn't like it, I could tear it apart and resew it somewhere else. So sewing seemed to be an appropriate process to move forward with. And I had already been using photography as a means of exploration. So it came very naturally to just take one subject matter, in this case, a figure I had photographed in my studio, deconstruct the subject by taking different photographs and reassembling them again onto different backdrops. Now here, the image, the C prints, are actually sewn onto a board and then onto a canvas, but originally they were just sewn onto loose materials like canvas or velvet, and I needed a support for the structure, so I started to stretch the canvas and experiment with the backgrounds. Actually, I think this is in reverse. The next slide is first. So these are C prints sewn onto board and then onto painted canvas, and the lines are embroidery floss. Just to give you an idea of scale, this is a much larger one. I have the dimensions. Hopefully you can see both in inches and in centimeters. The prints also became archival inkjet prints throughout time. So this is an example of that. I worked on a series of self-portraits, examining identity and imagining and reimagining myself kind of before the age of selfie. And around the same time, I made a visit to Rome, to Centrale Montemartini, which is the first electric plant in Rome, housing a beautiful selection. And I think to this date, they still are, fortunately, an amazing collection of classical statues on loan from the Capitoline Museum in this industrial setting. So I photographed a number of those statues and brought back the images to New York with me and printed them out and worked with just exploring assembling them onto canvas, painted canvas again. So this is all from Centrale Montemartini's collection. The goddess of good fortune, or if I do not mispronounce this, Fortuna Oiste, I believe. And then we have Jupiter. So there were a number of pieces in this series. The images were captured, they were printed, but they were not fully assembled, the rest of the images, in other words, until much, much later, 2020, and we all know what happened. So I had a huge chunk of time on my hands, and I returned to completing the series. Now, here you will see the color of the background having changed, and it kind of reflects the color, the vivid colors that I was using in my paintings at the time. This is, I like to call it half warrior, but it's actually a study of a warrior. It's a high-ranking officer, the statue, and I was exploring volume and space and kind of reflecting on his status in society. Now, the radial bursts from the center are just loosely inspired by the Roman sun god, Sol Invictus. And there's a storyline, of course, there's a relationship between the sewing pattern or the diagrams on the front and the content of the work. So this is, I'm not going to get into it because it will be way too long. We'll be here till the morning, but this is Aristogiton, the symbol of the tyrannicide who became the symbol of democracy in Athens. And this is the completed warrior. One thing that was continually important also, and has been in both my paintings and sewing collages, is to connect the different areas, spaces, if you will, or geographies of the canvas together. So space plays a big part in the work, and volume, of course, but just connecting them aside from the content. So the thread lines are always on the work. I do not hide them. In fact, personally, they're more important to me than whatever subject matter is underneath. So in this series, which I restarted in 2020, I restricted myself with a kind of self-imposed discipline to only work with the content that was created back in early 2000s as just a means of exploration. The only work that has an extra element from the current period is an upside down letter L on the upper left-hand corner. This is the remainders of the statue of Orpheus, who prophet, poet, musician who charmed everyone with his music. And I don't know how visible it is for, well, yeah, you can see it. There's an S-shaped curve that's you see with the horizontal lines created. It is just loosely inspired by musical waves. Now, these are from the former Parish Art Museum's Arboretum in New York. There are two pieces I'm going to show you. This is sculpture by the American sculptor John Hancock, called the Naiads. And then there are technical aspects of each work, of course. So I wanted to complement, if you will, some of the pigment or the colors in the prints. So if you look at the lower half of the work, it's actually a cool gray that shifts into this kind of olive green. And it happens in a number of works, but it's just most visible here. And Commodus, son of Marcus Aurelius, of course, from the same court or garden, if you will, at the former Parish Art Museum's Arboretum. If you might have noticed, most of the subject matters that I worked with or photographed were male, either statues or persons, if you will. And I found a sense of equilibrium in using a process that's often associated with the feminine, the sewing process, to kind of compose these images. And then in 21, we had a solo show with Roya Khajavi Projects at Highline 9 Gallery. So this just kind of gives you an idea of scale and how they were presented. I would love to show the pieces from the Capitoline Museum in Italy at one point. And what I really loved also about the show is that we were able to exhibit the first, well, it wasn't the first sewings exactly, but the first set of sewings, if you will, that kind of embarked me on this journey alongside the more recent pieces. So since then, meaning like about a year and a half ago, I have started work on an entirely new series of sewing collages that reflects more of the content that I was working with in my paintings. They're not finished, so I don't have any images for you. I have posted works in progress on my social media under Labbauf. If you'd like to follow, I will certainly be posting more pictures when they're finished. Now, moving on to paintings, only again starting from the year 2000 forward after figurative expressionism. So lines had already started entering my work around that time, partly inspired by the thread lines, I have to say, in the sewing collages, but also theoretically because if I used solid planes of color, they would clash and they would create boundaries. I wanted to create boundaries, but I also wanted to break them and intersect them. And the best way to do that for me was to use lines. So there could be lines intersecting in different areas instead of confining one area to a solid color. I experimented with the grid. Again, this is one of a series, but and went back and forth for the first couple of years. So I dropped the grid in favor of much more loose, organic, fluid lines to create these compositions. This is a larger painting, and it's one of 3 pieces. It says oil on canvas, but it's actually mixed media and oil on canvas, I noticed. So I worked with different subject matters. I was very moved and disturbed by the US invasion of Iraq at the time. So there's a whole war series that came out of that. Again, and you can see the history of expressionism in the lines, very bold, robust lines to kind of, and this thick layering of weaving the image together. So I reduced the content and it went back and forth. The kind of timelines overlap. This is a very linear presentation, but of course, as artists, we kind of go back and forth. I experimented with grids again to kind of create, there were a series of like 20 soldier head studies to kind of figure out how to use these lines to compose the content, the images that I was working with just for the heads of the soldiers. And then I dropped the grid again at one point here. There was a lot going on. So finally I decided, you know what? I'm going to reduce my content to just portraits to figure all of this out. There's just too much going on. I reduced the content for about, I want to say 10 years. I only painted portraits to kind of figure out and master this way of painting and reduce the number of lines. So the background actually comes through, and that was very important. I wanted to merge the 2 spaces, the foreground and the background together. Again, one of many, many smaller studies and paintings of portraits from that period. So moving forward to 2006, as you see, I even broke down, the lines became so refined, and I even broke down those lines to little particles, if you will, to study light and shadow, color, and also explore more of a representation of the subject matter, always allowing for the background to come through. Through that period, I worked with different scales, again, just as a means of exploration. They become, from small, they become larger, and then they go back to small scale paintings. This is a very large self-portrait, actually. It took quite a while, and there are many, many layers of paint underneath, but just unfortunately, it's not possible to convey this scale, but it's quite large. This gives you a little bit of an idea of scale, actually. Exhibition at Aran Gallery in Tehran in 2010. So like I said, I went back into a smaller scale again because I wanted to gradually start introducing other content than portraits, and it was easier to do that in a smaller scale for me. So very small portrait from self-portrait from 2014. Fashion, Korean fashion, fantastic fashion designer Lee Sang-bong. And that brought me to 2016 as an example here. So now I'm playing around, as you see more. We have the North Korean leader, Kim Jong-un, of course, in the front of this painting on panel wood. And he's kind of emerging from his submarine to survey what's going on in the front. And behind him, you see the outline of the captain of the submarine. And behind the captain is, of course, Disney's figure, Bugs Bunny, excuse me, Warner Brothers figure, Bugs Bunny. And his famous line is, anyone?
What's up, dog?
Well, yes, but you know this means war. So I was playing around with content, as you see, and one of the things that interested me at the time is kind of return to the imagery of my own childhood, because certainly Bugs Bunny was one of them. But other characters, other images as a child growing up in Tehran, in Iran, in the 1970s, our lives were very much surrounded by Western influences. So I kind of wanted to explore and investigate these mythologies and the influences they had on identity, both personally and collectively, as well as the power of distribution that that industry had to export these images globally across the world. So, of course, we have the superhero Batman here in an Elizabethan ruff. And in this image, he's juxtaposed against the outline of a female figure that I had extracted from the master miniaturist painter Behzad, Iranian painter Behzad. And this was an entire series. I'm going to share more images with you on this. So you do see the female, to me, the real superhero here. The female superhero she's on the right-hand side. I mean, the color of the orange is much more vivid. I don't think this slide does it justice. In person, you can actually, as you get closer, you can kind of see her much more clearly. And on a more formal aspect, what was fascinating to me is, again, that the lines could define a certain boundary, but they could be intersected and broken. And this is from well to well. We have the superhero, we have the female superhero, if you will, from another Persian legend, Shirin, her name was. And we have an oil rig. In the small oil rig in the lower left-hand side of the diptych, and on the upper right-hand side, with the white piece that you see, that's actually an aftabe. Aftabe was a clay vehicle or pot that you filled up with water and to clean yourself when you went to the bathroom before plumbing. So it's kind of this recycling. It's about recycling, and really the message is more about recycling images, how the entertainment industry was recycling their imagery globally. So, and at the same time, I started to kind of explore more real life superheroes, my own. One of them being Prime Minister Dr. Mossadegh, the Iranian Prime Minister who nationalized the Iranian oil industry. Unfortunately, he was removed from power afterwards in 1953 by the coup d'etat that was designed by the US government and Britain. So you see a partial portrait of him in the front, dissolving. You see, of course, the lurking shadow of the superhero in the back, and then very, very thin outlines that are, well, one of them is very centrally visible. They're outlines of figures from the date he was prosecuted, he was convicted, and he was removed from court. So it's actually from an archival photograph, that part of the painting. Following on with the same story in this painting, the operation, ironically, was called Operation Ajax, which is a cleaning product. So in 2020, I started employing straight lines to compose parts of the image and the subject matter. This is a self-portrait, one of 3 pieces. It's a partial self-portrait on a partial map of northwestern Iran. Of course, we have masks floating down. And in the lower right-hand side, there's another image of an icon that Disney's version of Snow White. That was a figure that I was raised with in the subject matters that I was looking at as a child, both in cartoons and comics. She has been appearing in a number of paintings since then. This is called All Truth Is Not Created Equal. So we have British Petroleum's perfect mandala falling into pieces. There's a lot of detail I'm not going to get into. There's still the map of Iran that's kind of dissolving with thread lines. And one thing of note I'll make about this painting is that the further you get away from it, or if you blur your eyes, Snow White becomes very real. But the closer you get to it, to the actual painting, the Disney's myth starts to fall apart. Study for a painting with Snow White again from 2019, Silent Song. And this is a painting I actually started in 2020, but there was that gap of time when I returned to the sewing collages. So I only recently finished Silent Song. And I should, even though it says on there, I should have said most of the works that you saw, of course, except the collages, were oil on canvas. So that's about it about my work for now. But as to why I'm here, just especially for our online audience, because I think the in-person audience has had the privilege of experiencing this. So two main reasons. I mean, not that you need any reasons to visit beautiful Siena in this amazing country. But 2 specific reasons, basically space and superheroes. So first down to space, as you saw in my work, connecting the different geographies of each piece, whether it's a collage or painting, has been really prominent and critical in my work. So this idea of a medieval city with a wall that goes around it, defining the boundary, this sense of in and out that you certainly feel with these gates. I wanted to experience that in person. I wanted to study that space in person. So that was one of the original reasons that I was drawn to apply for this residency. I started to look at the architecture of the city also from different angles and how it's composed, which led me to aerial views of the city that fascinated me further. So this module, if you will, the negative space, the tiny little black lines that give birth, if you will, to the city itself. It's just very, very inspiring. This is again mostly for our online audience. On the upper left side of the image, you see the magnificent cathedral, of course, the Duomo. It's just, I can't keep staring at it. It's mind-boggling, it's beautiful, it's disorienting, it's much more than you can even perceive in the picture. So I recommend everybody to buy a ticket and get to Siena, not just for that, of course, the treasures of the Pinacoteca, but what fascinates me in particular is the use of lines again. They do look like black and white lines, but they're actually green marble that have been oxidized through time. But these lines, again, these are all personal observations, break down every solid plane. So that is a subject matter that visually, I mean, that visual play is something that I'm very much drawn to, and as well, of course, inside. Okay, so for the second reason why I'm here, I didn't tell you one of the first, my first connections with the Italian culture was actually attending an Italian Catholic school in Tehran from 1st grade to 8th grade. So that was my first introduction. And as you see me all dressed up on the upper left corner, as my mom liked to dress me up every day as I went to school. And the school was run by these Catholic fathers, and they had a small church, a beautiful church, which most of the students, the majority of the students being in Iran were Muslim. We had minorities, a few Jewish minorities, Baha'is, as well as Christians. So during religion class, the Christian students were invited to go inside the church, but the majority of the school was not. We attended Muslim classes. I did get a chance to have a glimpse inside the church, and that was the first time that I had an encounter in person with Christian paintings, if you will, or symbolism, crosses, and so forth. Of course, I had seen it in the media, but this was actually in person. So we do have about, I mean, there are many churches and cathedrals in Iran. We have about 600 churches in Iran. This is actually a beautiful cathedral that was, it's a 17th century cathedral ordered to be built by one of the kings of Iran, Shah Abbas, for the Armenians in particular, because of the genocide that happened, and they had to flee the Ottoman Empire. So that's, this structure was built on top of another structure, but this is the beautiful Vank Cathedral, painted elaborately inside with beautiful murals. This is the New Day's celebration. This is, by the way, in the city of Isfahan. It's not in the capital. It's not in Tehran. So one of the subjects that has continually also fascinated me is the migration of different belief systems. In this particular case, religious belief systems, geographically, of course, across space, but also across time. I'm sorry, I don't have a title for that. I don't think that's in the same church. I believe that's in Tehran. So of course, there's this wealth, this vast wealth of Christian art and Christian iconography that exists in the world. It has survived. And I wanted to spend time with that, because I think it's very wrong to look at these artworks as religious art or Christian art. This is a part of our collective history, and I wanted to spend time with these stories. So, and where else better to go than come and be with the masters of the Sienese master painters here. I'm going to only show you a few of my favorites, I promise, and then that's for my presentation. But this is Duccio's painting, The Holy Women, and this happens repeatedly in the medieval paintings of the period, that this paradoxical space, if you will, so the angel and the women are painted almost three-dimensionally, they have shadows, and yet they're kind of floating on this flat background. And I believe this is a part of the Maesta, the larger painting, which is being housed at the Museum of the Duomo. My favorite part is the undulating part of the mountain, if you will, which looks like butterflies flying in mid-space. So I mentioned superheroes. These are the superheroes actually that I've come to spend time with. I believe as our world became more secular, we started to create our own fictional superheroes. But for centuries and to this date, these are the superheroes who were worshipped. So there's so much in each one of these paintings. I mean, the adoration of the Magi is just another, and to be there in person in the Pinacoteca, this sheer scale of it and the colors, and Lisa just informed me that it was recently restored. So just those dreamy colors, and the more you look, the more I really encourage everyone to visit and just sit and spend time with these works. My favorite, I'll just let you know, aside from the odd paradoxical space that goes back and forth, the Virgin is my favorite because she's so flat. She is this point of entry, if you will, like a window into the work, as well as the storyline that's unfolding. Of course, there's the metaphysical, beautiful gold background, the Annunciation, Lorenzetti, of course. So we have these three different things going on. We have the perspective on one of the first times perspective was actually used in the floor pattern, as you see. So you have the chair around the Virgin in three dimensions, and then you have this sacred gold background, this metaphysical space, if you will, a third space. And as you move, the gold, because of the reflection of the light, it just kind of moves with you. One of my favorite altarpieces, the Gesuetti altarpiece, immaculately painted by Sano de Pietro. One thing that struck me recently, though, observing it again, I think just looking at the past helps me comprehend present in general in life, often, not always. And one thing that struck me, as much as I adore this painting and it's powerfully painted, is the number of male figures. I didn't even count the gender of the angels, but just reflecting on just history of patriarchy and the number of male figures that surround the Virgin. If I'm not mistaken, and I could very well be, if you exclude the angels, there are at least a dozen, if not more, male figures and saints, whereas there are, I believe, 5 female saints surrounding her. And it's not just in this particular one, but this one really struck me. And of course, my God, you have the deposition from the cross in Il Sodom. I mean, this is theater. I mean, the gestures, the blue that moves your eyes, and this sheer scale of it, to be in front of it. One other thing that came to me as of recent is that, again, this is personal observation. It has nothing to do with art history, that something could be very painful and traumatic, obviously, as taking Jesus down from the cross, but it can also be beautiful, the way he painted it. Yeah, that blue. And lastly, unfortunately, I haven't seen this. This is at the Uffizi. I was hoping to see it, but unfortunately, the one day that I'm there, the museum is closed because of the holiday coming up. So Il Sodoma's Saint Sebastian. So yeah, that's all I'm going to share with you for today. So thank you. Please, by all means, if you have any questions, let me know.
Thank you so much, Farsad. It's just so wonderful to have this glimpse into your very interdisciplinary work, looking at your mixed media and how, of course, that connects to your approach to painting. And I think it's so inspiring also for our students, because I'm seeing some really interesting intersections between the work that they've been creating and also picking up on materials and themes that are very much part of your work. So, and of course, seeing how you're responding to this unique setting of Siena, I think is really very inspiring as well. Are there any questions from folks here with our in-person audience? We can obviously continue our conversation also upstairs when we have the chance to see what he has in the studio, but just while we're here together, I don't know if there were, yeah.
I'm obviously fascinated by the relationship between your sewing and the emotion and the color that goes on behind intersect. But I know you said, I could go on until tomorrow morning, so I'm happy to wait for a glass of wine.
Sure, we'll do that. Absolutely.
But I think it is very fascinating, the fact that they're so, the lines of the sewing are so direct and so strong and bold, and then everything else that is happening behind, which is moving and emotional and fascinating.
The content. Thank you.
Just I was very pleased to see that in your presentation you included the one piece of the Maestà by Duccio, because it's what my students are working from one of their assignments. And I saw your presentation that you are very much inspired by classical art, classical sculptures. And what's your feelings about medieval art?
Medieval art?
Yes, it looked more like just 1200, 1500.
Well, I would say later medieval part, the periods that I was focusing on. I was reflecting on it actually in the museum. And one of the things that appeals to me even more than the Renaissance paintings is this space that's unusual, the paradox. And I think part of that is not just per se for me as an artist. I think it plays with our contemporary vision, a collage sensibility that we have as contemporary individuals in the society, because we've been exposed to this idea of collage from at least a century and a half ago almost. So it just plays with that. So it resonates.
That's
with.
Very interesting.
Yeah.
You connect to collage.
Yes.
And to the construction. No, I also think that the construction space in medieval art is very interesting. And so it was very interesting that you actually connected that to the collage technique.
It's actually a contemporary observation. I do not believe, obviously I don't think that was in the mind of the artists.
No.
So, but as a contemporary artist looking at it, and my vision being so accustomed to having seen so many collages in my lifetime, I think it plays with that. Even the Virgin that I mentioned in the painting where it's hollow, the Adoration of the Magi.
Okay.
So the flatness of her, and there's also one of the Magi, I believe, with the red cloth, just those two flat spaces kind of juxtaposed, if you will, against all the texture and all the storyline that's unfolding. So that back and forth. And I do find a lot of that in that period of medieval art from 14th century in particular, not earlier so much.
Very interesting what you're saying. I think it can be very interesting for students. Talking about similar concepts.
Is that right?
Yes, exactly what you're saying. And you're looking forward to seeing your work
thank you.
upstairs, of course.
It's my pleasure.
But we have some nice comments coming in also from our online viewers. Not any questions specifically, but lots of positive comments. But certainly if our online viewers do have any questions in the last couple of minutes, do feel free to write them in the comments section. So. So we can certainly continue the conversation with our lucky in-person audience over some snacks during the studio visit. But certainly we're very grateful for our online viewers for joining us as well. And And I'll just mention to our in-person audience to save the date for Saturday when our spring group of participants will be showcasing some of their work. And we might also have another chance to pop up to Farsad's studio to see how his projects are evolving upstairs too. But thank you so much for this wonderful glimpse into your work. All right.